Okay. All right, you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Hello and welcome to Cashing In on Carbon, a turnkey solution to get paid for your land stewardship. My name is Claire Weinzerl, and I am the Communications Manager at the Illinois Soybean Association. Please join me in thanking our corporate partner, Farmers Edge, for sponsoring our webinar today. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will answer those following the presentation. And one more note that today's webinar will be recorded in the event you would like to rewatch or share with your network. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Aaron Robinson and Ben Johnson. Aaron Robinson has served as Chief Strategy Officer since August of 2020, where he is responsible for sales strategy and business development. Robinson grew up on a livestock and grain farm in West Central Illinois and continues to be involved in the family operation. Prior to joining Farmers Edge, Robinson had an over 20-year career at Monsanto Bayer, where he held various roles in several departments, including North America Business Model Strategy, North America Corn Revenue and Product Lead, Sales, Human Resources, and Technology Development. Robinson holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Biology from Washington University and a Master's in Agriculture from Iowa State University. Born and raised on a farm in Iowa, farming has always been a way of life for Ben Johnson. Starting out his career as a farm manager, Ben transitioned into ag retail, gaining vast exposure to precision agriculture. After 5 years, Ben acted on his pull towards the ag tech space, seeking a company that was focused on the future of digital farming technologies. Now a product marketing manager for Farmers Edge, Ben is highly involved in new technology developments and helps customers understand how, why, and which products fit their needs best, from small farmers to large operations and ag retailers. Today, they will be presenting Cashing In on Carbon, a turnkey solution to get paid for your land stewardship. As more farmers continue to capitalize on carbon, we want to provide you with everything you need to know to easily enter the market, generate high-quality carbon credits, and get paid for your land stewardship. During today's presentation, you will learn which practices qualify, tips to optimize carbon sequestration, ways to generate higher quality offsets, data requirements for seamless verification, and how it works for your farm from field to market. Please join me in welcoming Aaron and Ben.
All right, so today, just to go over the agenda here, we're going to be going and taking a deep dive into the carbon space here. So we're going to start off by defining carbon offsets. Then we're going to go and we're going to talk about the different types of carbon markets. Then we'll talk about climate smart farming, which practices qualify. We'll talk about our smart carbon program and how to generate high quality carbon offsets. We'll talk about the emissions life cycle and how we can work together. And if you stick around to the very end, we'll talk about a very special offer from your farm. So with that, I'll kick it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Ben, and welcome everybody. Appreciate everybody taking the time to join today. You know, one of the things that we discuss a lot with our customers and even internally is this evolution of the digital agricultural ecosystem and what data is going to do on the farm. And, you know, certainly today there's a lot of examples of leveraging data, whether that's in helping to choose the right hybrid or variety for your farm, variable rate fertilizer, crop protection, fungicide applications, agronomic scouting, collecting that data, whether it's at planting or applications or through harvest, monitoring irrigation. But what we're seeing happen now is the next wave of what are you able to use that data from the farm for, from a insight perspective and also from a decision support tool, and whether that's understanding projecting yield and how that affects grain marketing, or leveraging data to understand if there's different financial opportunities or risk management opportunities around insurance. And today we're going to talk about how that data can be leveraged going forward to start to understand not only carbon offsets, but also the footprint of that grain coming off of the farm, and how do you trace that from the farm to the shelf of the grocery store and understand its impact on the environment. You know, so carbon is a hot topic. Certainly a lot of folks talking about carbon and the impact that agriculture can have positively on climate change, and how do we leverage data to do that more effectively. And so, just to level set and to understand what we're talking about when we talk about a carbon offset. Carbon offset is a digital environmental asset that's equivalent to 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent. And so when we talk about a ton of carbon, that's what we're talking about. When we talk about an offset, we're talking about those metric tons of CO2 equivalent. There's a lot of conversation around what do you use offsets for, who's buying them, what does it really mean? And the best way to think about this is almost like a math equation. So you've got, these companies through normal operations are having some sort of emissions, some sort of energy consumption that are needing to meet some sort of emissions target, whether that's self-imposed or in some geographies, a regulated emissions target. And you've got companies that have made net zero or carbon neutral claims, and what as part of that, they need to buy offsets. So offsets are the result of these organized carbon projects that are a set of practices. And in agriculture, we'll talk about what some of those practices are, but think of it as some of the practices that happen on that farm that are either sequestering carbon in the soil or reducing some sort of emissions. And so what these companies that have the net zero and carbon neutral claims are doing is, they're working on their operations, the way that they function as a company, to reduce some of their emissions on their own. And in most cases, there's some sort of resulting balance that they need to purchase offsets to truly get to that net zero or carbon neutral state. There's a couple of different carbon markets. There's the regulatory market. So in North America, you've got a regulated market in Alberta and California. That's where there's legislation dictating and controlling those emissions and what's allowed by these companies. More predominantly, though, you've got this voluntary market, which is, these companies that have made some sort of commitment around their environmental, social, and governance reporting in their annual report to their customers and to their investors that are making some sort of commitment around the environment and how they're going to operate. And so, you have both of these regulated and voluntary markets existing, and I would expect that we'll continue to have both markets going forward. The current price still, this is an area where the market is still evolving, but today, you can find carbon offsets trading somewhere between $20 and $40 a ton. And as this continues to evolve, we'll start to have a better supply demand signal around carbon. Now, there's a couple of major ag greenhouse gases that we're talking about when we talk about generating carbon offsets in agriculture. Carbon dioxide obviously is the main greenhouse gas, and it is a function of soil carbon and soil. When we talk about soil sequestration, we're really talking about taking that CO2 out of the air and storing it in the soil. And then you've got nitrous oxide, which is a more potent greenhouse gas, and is a result of nitrogen use, nitrogen fertilizer use in crops. So those are the two that we'll talk about, and some of the projects and tactics that are qualifying and generating offsets. There's a couple of different ways that you can generate offsets as it relates to soil carbon or carbon sequestration. This really is about taking and growing plants in the field, whether that's corn, soybean, cotton, wheat, cover crops, growing those and essentially storing the carbon in the soil and keeping it there through reduction of tillage, introducing different residue management practices, introducing a longer growing season or cover crops, intercropping, lengthening the crop rotation or diversity of the crop rotation. And so those are really the practices that we talk about when we're talking about soil sequestration or carbon dioxide. From a nitrous oxide perspective, it's really about 4R management and applying and utilizing nitrogen fertilizer in an effective way to be able to get the right source, rate, timing, and place of that nitrogen fertilizer, matching that nitrogen fertilizer to the crop needs, and understanding when to apply that product. And so by effectively managing nitrogen, you're reducing those nitrous oxide emissions. Going forward in the future, there are certainly going to be other opportunities as it relates to the agricultural supply chain and other emissions that are happening either upstream or downstream from the farm, and understanding fully what does it really take to grow that crop, how many grams of carbon dioxide equivalent are there per kilogram of grain, and how does that track from the farm to the grocery shelf and ultimately to someone's house. You know, the biggest challenge that we face in carbon offsets or carbon credits is the ability to actually prove what's happening on that farm, on that field. This is a highly intense process in terms of the data, and so being able to capture that data almost passively as part of the normal agronomic practices becomes really critical to be able to scale this. And when we talk about conventional farming versus climate smart farming, it really becomes about adopting some of these new practices, small incremental change and continuous improvement over time, whether that's adopting a different application regime around nitrogen, or switching from some sort of tillage to strip tillage, or introducing a cover crop. But it's about continuing to evolve those agronomic practices in such a way that you're storing carbon dioxide in the soil, or reducing those emissions from nitrogen fertilizer. And what we're focused on is really trying to find this balance around productivity, profitability, and sustainability. And this is really critical to understand, how do these practices fit into both profitability and productivity. This is a really key element in terms of, should I introduce cover crops? What's the impact on a productivity perspective? What's a profitability impact? What's the change in my profitability as I manage nitrogen differently? What does it do to my operation from an efficiency perspective? And so that's really what we're focused on, is finding the balance between those three elements, and really driving to that low carbon grain, as well as generation of these carbon credits. And we do have some experience in this space. So we've been operating in the Alberta Emissions Offset Registry for the last 6+ years, helping our Canadian customers in Alberta generate carbon credits. We've got a group of carbon experts that actually have helped develop some of the methodologies that are being used in Canada. And then it's really this, excuse me, the robust on-farm digital infrastructure and an integrated digital platform. Those two things really are focused on delivering agronomic insight and decision support, but they also are really critical in terms of managing the required data to create these carbon credits. And then we've got real boots on the ground and our own soil sampling laboratory that helps quantify what's happening on those farms, and managing both agronomics and profitability and sustainability. Our approach is delivering sustainable farming, water, and land management practices to drive carbon capture in the soil, and to try to find that balance between profitability, productivity, and sustainability. And leveraging our digital platform, whether it's understanding previous year yield, understanding management, using variable rate technology, satellite imagery to track crop development, and to really understand what the crop's needs are around nitrogen, and to do that efficiently and effectively. When you think about the timeline, what does this really mean from an operation perspective? The first thing to really do is to go through an assessment and understand what are those current agronomic practices, what's happening on the farm, what's changed in the last, say 10 to 15 years. Are there any some sort of change events that were pretty significant, whether that's the change from conventional tillage to conservation tillage, or no-till or strip-till? Have you started using cover crops? Has your crop rotation changed? And to really understand what are the opportunities, what's the best fit from a carbon perspective on your operation. Every operation's a little bit different. And so this assessment phase becomes a really important starting place. At that point, it really becomes about the data, and it becomes about gathering the raw ingredients needed to create these offsets, whether that's understanding tillage passes, residue management, crop rotation, manure application, any of those types of operations that happen on the farm. And as you can imagine, if you're doing this for a long period of time, doing this manually can be a fairly lengthy endeavor, and that's where digital platforms like Farm Command can help manage that data. Once you've gathered the raw ingredients or the data, you start the aggregation process, which is essentially taking all of the fields in the operation or all of the fields in a region, and you're summarizing these records of the participants in the project. And the reason that you do that is you've got another step that you've got to go through around a third-party verification, where a third party is coming in and validating that you have the necessary data, evidence, and proof of what happened, that the calculations around how much carbon was stored in the soil, or how much nitrous oxide emissions were avoided or reduced. And you go through that. Once you go through that process, in conjunction with the project owner or the project developer, is when you can take that to a registry and essentially serialize these credits or offsets. So you've got to get to that serialization phase to have something that you can actually sell, and because you're essentially serializing that credit so that a buyer can come on the registry, can purchase that carbon credit, and then retire that carbon credit as an offset to their emissions. And the reason that you essentially serialize these is so that you're not double counting what's happened on that farm. And so it's a very rigorous process. From an interaction perspective, the farmer essentially signs the carbon credits to the project developer. In this case, we're acting as a project developer as well as a data management partner in this development. You go through the emissions life cycle that we just talked about. So you go through the project registration, the emission offset serialization to the end. And at that point, a buyer comes in and those carbon offsets are transferred to the buyer, at which point the buyer pays the project developer, and then the project developer shares that revenue back to the farmer who actually implemented the practices on that farm. There's a few different ways that you can approach carbon, and I think this is a really critical element as it relates to individual operations. Not every operation is practicing the same tillage, is practicing the same crop rotation, and so finding variability and a way to participate for every operation is really critical. It becomes about choice and what the best fit is. And so you got some set of customers or growers that are going to qualify because they can make a change around tillage or crop rotation, or maybe they're starting to be interested in cover crops. And so maybe they are a good candidate from a soil carbon perspective. And you may have another set of customers or farmers that are managing nitrogen, really intensively today. And there's an opportunity for them to think about split applications or using different forms of nitrogen or using digital tools to match crop demand for that fertility instead of maybe applying all of the nitrogen in the fall or in the spring. And then you're going to have another set of customers or farmers that potentially qualify for both. And so it really becomes about finding that best fit for the operation. Really, what are some of the considerations agronomically? What are some of the considerations both from a profitability, productivity perspective as you're setting out on a sustainability strategy? A lot of the practices that are being considered, or a lot of the evolution that's being driven by either machinery technology or digital technology, is going to enable these things going forward. The Smart Carbon Soil Carbon program really focuses on, again, tillage, adoption of cover crops and the crop rotation, expanding crop rotations. So maybe introducing another crop, lengthening the growing season, thinking about relative maturities, maturity groups of those crops being grown, or even substituting manure for synthetic fertilizers, or introducing biologicals into the fertilizer regime, managing nitrogen differently. So it is a soil sequestration project. It really rewards those farmers that are making changes to manage soil carbon or organic matter differently. The key is when did that change occur? What is that switch date where there was a change in tillage or introduction of a new crop or introduction of a cover crop? And in this case, the switch date can be back as far as January 2010. And you can go back and generate vintage credits for the last 5 years. So you can't go back to 2010 and generate vintage credits for all of those years, but you can account for that change date or that switch date as far back as 2010. And so if you introduced cover crops or introduced a new crop since 2010, could be a really good opportunity to capture value out of that change. The project length is 10 years, so it's in 10-year increments. You can do a maximum of two consecutive projects. The farm data is updated annually, but you go through a verification process every 3 years. And so what that looks like is you essentially do a verification at enrollment and really are certifying all of those vintage credits if eligible. And then you're gathering data on an annual basis, and then every 3 years you're going through a re-verification. At that time, you can continue that and stacking these going forward. I think it's really important to understand that change that happened at the switch date, you're not necessarily locked into that particular practice needing to continue exactly the same for a period of 10 years. Think of it as the collection of eligible practices that can be continued and built on year after year. And so maybe the original switch was from conventional tillage to reduced till. Maybe you didn't go all the way to no-till, and maybe no-till is an opportunity. Or maybe you're only planting cover crops after corn or after soybeans. So there may be an opportunity to continue to build on that. And so I think a lot of people think, okay, well, if the switch date was 2010 and I made this switch, that means I need to continue that exact same practice for the next 10 years potentially, and that's not always the case. Data requirements, this is a fairly abbreviated version, but it's really about identifying that field, understanding what the boundaries are and everything that happened in that field as it relates to, what crops have been grown, when was it planted, when was it harvested, what was the yield, what's the rotation on an annual basis, what's the fertilizer application look like, was there manure applied on that field, what's the residue management, tillage, irrigation on that field. And so it's really about characterizing everything that happened in that field that could have an impact on carbon dioxide emission or avoidance of nitrous oxide emissions. The proof of land title is an important step as well. And so we work with a partner really to prove that there's title to the land. In the case that it's a leased farm, then understanding what the agreement is around landlord carbon assignment, and is it the operator that has right to the carbon? What's the agreement with the landowner? Just as to give you a perspective of some of these practices and how they vary and how much carbon is sequestered based on geography and based on practice. In this case, switching from chisel plowing to either no-till or strip till, you can see by the map that can vary pretty significantly, right? It can be fairly low at a tenth of a ton of CO2 equivalent per acre or less, up to almost 0.6 of a ton. And so geography, environment have a big impact on, really from a carbon credit perspective, what you're able to capture. Same thing with introduction of a cover crop, maybe it's cereal rye or some other non-legume cover crop with some sort of reduction in nitrogen fertilizer. Again, can vary widely, from a tenth to almost a ton of carbon per acre or CO2 equivalent per acre, depending on the geography. And so some of these changes, if you're considering them or have adopted these practices recently, can be pretty significant and a different value opportunity on the farm. Just as an example, this is an example from North Central Illinois, the baseline situation. So think of this as the historical practice, soy followed by 2 years of corn, chisel plow after harvest, and then some sort of field cultivator before planting, and a nitrogen rate of 1.2 pounds per target bushel. With the change, and this is a farmer that was considering a change to strip till anyway, and so when you start to put together the numbers here, you go away from that chisel plow, go to strip till in the spring, modify that nitrogen rate slightly, and now assuming that the carbon market value is $20 per ton, you can see over that 10-year project that there's over $100 an acre in value from a change that the farmer was already considering. And then layer on top of that any sort of fertilizer savings, any sort of fuel savings, potentially it starts to be fairly substantial in terms of the impact on the farm. In terms of how do you engage in this? We get a lot of questions around, well, is now the time? Should I wait? How do I get engaged in this process? And I think the really important piece is this is a data intensive process. And I think having a platform that is collecting data, organizing the data, and especially those elements that are necessary from an offset generation perspective is the first thing. Make sure whether you're going to engage immediately, you want to sign up for a project for 2021 or 2022, or you're going to wait a couple of years and see how this evolves. I think the most important piece is to start to get your data in order and digitize that farm so that you're capturing the necessary proof and evidence. Second piece is find somebody that's a project developer that has experience, that can partner and go through this third-party verification, can engage with the registry and manage some of the process. This can be a time-consuming process, whether it's manual data management or going through this verification process. So find a partner that can help you generate these high quality offsets, and somebody that can make a market, can find buyers, that can find the best market opportunity, can bring together and aggregate a large volume of offsets and attract a lot of buyers to maximize the value. We'll continue to see this carbon market evolve. In the near term, it's really about being able to find those buyers that are looking for high quality offsets. And then, find somebody that's going to be able to return this value for the practices that you're considering, right? In the example that we shared, this was a consideration that the farmer was already undertaking and thinking about, and being able to bring additional value to the farm to justify that change and find that balance between profitability, productivity, and sustainability. That's a really, really good example of that. And so, certainly we will continue to see this evolve. We'll continue to see where the government goes in terms of how they're going to manage this. We're going to see additional companies come out and make commitments around net zero or carbon neutral. I think our understanding and our experience is there is a lot of demand for high quality agricultural offsets, just given the connection of agriculture to food and the consumer demand around that. And so excited to potentially partner and help you through this journey. With that, I'll turn it over to Ben, and he can go through the special offer.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Yes, so there's a lot to digest on this, a lot of new pieces to wrap your head around, and also a lot of data collection. And so with that, we want to make this as easy as possible for you. So we've got a special offer where you can get a no obligation carbon assessment. And then also we can give you a 1-year proof of value period for our integrated data solution that can help tie all these things together. And so as we talk about our integrated data solution, there's many pieces to this. So it starts with our telematics devices. So they're an brand agnostic telematics device. So it'll work just as well in John Deere as it will as in a Case or New Holland or whatever. And so we'll take that information that comes across the can from machinery, and we can take and send that up to the cloud and into our Farm Command platform that you can see in the center there to tie all these things together. We're also going to integrate in our on-farm weather stations. So we're collecting actual weather data from the farm that is specific to that specific area, not the local airport, 10 miles down the road. So that's great to keep accurate. We're also going to give you access to some high resolution imagery, which is going to help you not only manage your crops, but also just keep an eye on things like cover crops. Do you have even emergence out there? What is your coverage out there? So a really good tool there. So with all these tools, we also have some support and training. So we have a variety of YouTube videos and webinars as well. And we also have boots on the ground they'll come out to your farm. They will actually install the telematics devices. They'll install the weather stations, and they'll also train you on how to utilize the platform so you can get the most out of it. So it won't only just benefit collecting data for this carbon program, but also help you manage your farm a lot more efficiently using these digital tools. Other things that we can provide, we can do things like variable fungicide to help reduce some inputs there. We can also do variable fertilizer, variable seeding prescriptions, and the list really goes on and on. But we can take this a step further, where we can add on a actual fertility program to increase your return on investment here. So we can do 100% of your acres. We'll go out and sample every acre. And so that would be just comprehensive soil sampling. That's where we go and we take these samples. We will test them for all of the macronutrients, micronutrients, base saturations, pH, organic matter, on down the list of really a Cadillac set of soil tests there, giving you really deep insight to what's going on in the fertility on your farm there. And from there, we can do an unlimited variable rate prescriptions for seeding, fertilizer, fungicide, desiccation, and the list really does go on from there of what we can do. So 100% of your acres is $3. Now, if you only want to do 50% of your acres, we can do that, but that would be $2 per acre there. We also offer another program there, what we call nutrient management. And so this is where we do some composite soil sampling. So we go out and we sample the field, but we take all of those samples and we average them out to just have just some average numbers for the field. So that would give you an idea of what to go out there with a flat rate prescription or flat rate prescription out to the field. So that would be $1.50 per acre. The most popular program that we have is that variable rate sampling that we do, that zone-based sampling at $3 an acre, just to give you some insight there. So if you would like to book a meeting to get started, please reach out to us at carbon@farmersedge.ca. So I think we're going to open it up to questions now.
All right. Thank you both for that informative presentation. We're now going to begin taking questions from the audience. I do have a few that have come in. I'll just go ahead and get started here. So the first one is, if I've been cover cropping every other year or so, do I still qualify?
Yeah, again, this is on an individual field basis, and so you can really manage and track what's happening on an individual field basis. And so, those fields where you are cover cropping may have a slightly different carbon sequestration than those that are not, whether it's in the even or odd years. And so those fields definitely would qualify, and depending on what those other practices are around tillage or residue management, crop rotation, may qualify as well. There's just a different rate of carbon sequestration.
Great. Okay, next question. Several farmers are talking about waiting to make a decision on carbon. Why should I commit now?
I think the biggest reason is, to understand what is the data necessary, whether you're going to engage right away or you're going to wait and see what happens with the market or what happens with the programs. I think it's really critical to get started in organizing the data. I think the other reason to engage now is to really learn what this means for your farm in terms of efficiency, in terms of productivity and carbon, nitrous oxide emissions reductions, and then the ability to look back at some of these historical vintages, right? To get credit for the last 5 years of a practice that happened on that farm. And so maybe you've made a change and you are seeing the benefits of cover crops already. It's an opportunity to create additional revenue and additional value on the farm if you're already doing some of the qualifying practices.
Great. Okay, one final question here. Who owns the data as the information is transferred through the sales process?
Yeah, the farmer continues to own the data. As a project developer, really our role is to interact with the registry on the farmer's behalf, to help the farmer through our Farm Command platform, organize the data, to present that data as the evidence around carbon credit creation, around nitrous oxide emissions reductions. And so the farmer continues to own that data. We really are just partnering through our platform and through our project and development to assist the farmer in doing that.
Excellent. All right, well, that's all the time we have for questions today. I want to take a moment to thank Aaron and Ben for their informative presentation, and thank you to our corporate partner, Farmers Edge, for sponsoring today's webinar. You can find the recording of today's webinar on ISA's YouTube channel. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Okay, all right.